So they're at it again. We had the Atlanta shooting, and nobody can talk about the Atlanta shooting without bringing up Kyle Rittenhouse. Because what Kyle did was just like what happened in Atlanta. And one of the things they want to bring up is domestic terrorism, because Kyle was a domestic terrorist. So I thought I'd turn on the Twitter feed. People have accused me of creating straw man arguments with these dumb arguments that I've been doing. And so I thought I'd put on the Twitter feed to show people that, no, people are actually saying these dumb things. Hello out there. I am trying to get through.
With his powerful brainwaves cradled in the warmth of reasoning, it's time for Johnnie Walker Dread to straighten you out on a thing or two. Emanating all the way from exciting Las Vegas, Oklahoma, it's the Johnnie Walker Dread Show.
All right, so let's start off here. George votes blue always. Before you waste your money on My Pillow this holiday season, remind me to go out and buy some of those My Pillows, by the way. Remember that the CEO helped bail out the jackbooted white supremacist, domestic terrorist, thug, and murderer, Kyle Rittenhouse. Oh, man. If you're charged with murder and you plead not guilty, but then you hang out with domestic terrorists while you're out on bail, you shouldn't be out on bail. Lock Kyle Rittenhouse up until his trial. So here, Kyle Rittenhouse is not the domestic terrorist. It's those dudes in the bar. And those guys have not been accused of anything. Is anyone surprised that the company that's infamous for their SS coffee, and letting domestic terrorist Kyle Rittenhouse wear their merchandise also supports the Omaha Police Department? All right. You misspelled Kyle Rittenhouse, right-wing domestic terrorist. But don't worry, I'm sure people reading your reply will know what you meant to say. And then Kyle Rittenhouse is a white domestic terrorist. Kyle murdered 2 BLM protesters with an assault rifle. Kyle walked by cops who waved at him and didn't arrest him. Then let out on bail. Oh my gosh, he got bail. Kyle holds up the white power sign. Whatever. And still, Republicans haven't condemned Kyle. Why is that? Because he's innocent. Okay, so let's go ahead and dispense with this once and for all. Even if you thought that Kyle went there and murdered some protesters, that his self-defense claim was all a lie, he's still not a domestic terrorist. So let's take a look at the definition of terrorism. Okay, so here how in the United States has defined terrorism under the Federal Criminal Code. Title 18 of the code defines terrorism and lists the crimes associated with terrorism. And Section 2331 of Chapter 113B defines terrorism as activities that involve violent or life-threatening acts. Okay, so we'll say that for the sake of argument, Kyle meets that. That are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States, okay, or of any state, and appear to be intended. Okay, so let's take a look at Federal Criminal Code, Title 18, U.S. Code. Terrorism is activities that involve violent or life-threatening acts. Okay, so let's just suppose that Kyle went there and he killed those people and he didn't do it out of self-defense. Okay. So he would meet that criteria, that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or of any state and appear to be intended, 1, to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, 2, to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or 3, to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. So let's take a look at number 1, because that seems to be about the only one that could apply to Kyle. To intimidate or coerce a civilian population. Well, how did Kyle do that? You say, well, he had an AR-15 rifle. But when he's walking around, he's not intimidating anybody. Nobody even seems to pay much attention to him. Now, if he was walking around and he was pointing at people and scaring the hell out of them, you might be able to make a deal there if he was doing it to the general public. The only person that said anything was Mr. Yellow Pants, and even if his testimony is true, Kyle only threatened him. He's not the general public. Kyle is seen walking by numerous people with his rifle, not threatening them. I mean, that's a domestic terrorist. There are many occasions where he had people he could have easily provoked into something. He didn't do any of it. He walked around saying, medical, medical. That's a domestic terrorist? Okay, so let's take a look at the FBI definition. FBI definition of terrorism: the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof, in furtherance of political or social objectives. Well, what would Kyle's social or political objective be? He hasn't even stated it. It makes for a very poor terrorist to inflict terrorism and not tell people why he's doing it. I mean, how do you further a political or social objective if you don't tell people why you're scaring the living hell out of them? For example, we all remember the Las Vegas shooter. He gets on top of a building and he's just shooting people left and right. Is he a terrorist? No. He's a mass shooter. He's a killer. He's a murderer, mass murderer. You can apply all those definitions to him. But terrorist? Well, what was his ideology? What was his goal? What was his motive? He left no manifesto. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was a terrorist. Why? Because he committed his acts in an attempt to further a political or social objective. He left a manifesto, and he tried to intimidate people into adopting that manifesto or face the consequences. That's what terrorists do. They use fear to intimidate governments and the general public into adopting certain belief systems, changing laws, letting certain people out of prison, a furtherance of some sort of goal. Kyle hasn't stated anything of the sort. Dylan Roof, terrorist. Why? He left one of the victims and told that victim to go out and deliver a message. That's a terrorist. He's using fear and intimidation to further an objective. So a terrorist has to have a clear motive. They have to be doing the act to further some sort of ideology. And it doesn't do any good to commit an act if you don't tell people what the ideology is. So if you are killing people because you don't like them, because you hate them, that's not a terrorist. Revenge killing is not terrorism. So even if Kyle hated BLM protesters and went there because he hated them, it's still not terrorism unless he tries to use that fear and intimidation to further some sort of goal. Too often we use terrorism as a synonym for really, really horrible, terrible crime. It's not the case. It has a very distinct meaning. And it's important that we understand these meanings because we use the number of acts that are committed under terrorism to understand what's taking place globally. It is important to know how many terrorist acts are being committed. And it doesn't do any good to just define it so broadly that almost any horrible crime is an act of terrorism. Just recently, in fact, the last video I did, I outlined a couple of kids who burned a man alive in his own home. Horrific crime of the worst sort, but it's not terrorism. They didn't do it for any political ideology, or at least nothing they stated. Now, if they had burned him alive and threatened to do others unless we adopted some sort of manifesto of theirs, that would be terrorism. So, Kyle Rittenhouse, domestic terrorist? No. Even if you believe that he committed murder that night, he's little more than a common murderer. But he's innocent, we all know that. Like my video and subscribe to my channel.